Well, we're right at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. My name, for all of you out there in IG land, I'm Dr. Angela Patterson, and I'm the head writer and editor at Springtide Research Institute. We study the religious and spiritual lives of people 13 to 25. We are very interested in how they make meaning of the world around them, how they come to understand their own faith and spiritual journeys. And so we have a lot of partners that we work with in doing that, especially when we're looking at specific demographics. The beauty of Springtide is that we look at everyone under the ages of 13 to 25. So that could be any religious affiliation, any race, gender, sexual orientation, you name it. They are fair game as long as they are within that age range. So when it comes to talking about specific demographics, we start to rope in our partners, and PFLAG is definitely a partner that we have had. Jean Marie has worked with us on our Parents Handbook for our Springtide series on mental health. That came out last year, and it is still available for you at springtideresearch.org. We are going to have a little conversation today about how to support trans and non-binary youth. One of the things that we have found in our short tenure at Springtide is that there's generally not a lot of difference that we see between specific demographics when it comes to religious and spiritual expression, even mental health, even work life. We were surprised by that. Obviously, there's some pockets of difference along the way, but in general, most young people tend to follow the same patterns. What we did notice when we started working on the mental health handbook for parents specifically was that there were some really significant differences in how trans and non-binary youth were showing up compared to their cis counterparts. And so we wanted to consult the experts for that. We presented PFLAG with some of our findings and then asked them to reflect and to give some great tips for parents on how they might be able to help navigate that journey with their trans or non-binary teen or young adult. And we have an excellent submission from Jean Marie in that handbook. And so you can absolutely find that at springtideresearch.org. I'm going to let Jean Marie introduce herself and tell us all about what she's doing and where she's at now.
Thank you, Angela. It's so nice to be here. It's fun to be talking to you again, and I'm really grateful for this conversation because you're totally right. Looking at those numbers, there was this marked difference when we got to that one point, and I'm really excited to talk about that. So for anyone who I haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Jean Marie Navarro. My pronouns are she and her, or ella if you Spanish. And I am, for a few more days, the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. I've spent 17 years there, primarily focused on our educational efforts, which take us every place from our PFLAG chapters across the country to so many workplaces where, interestingly enough, we are having more and more conversations with parents who have kids who are LGBTQ identified, or who notice that their kids have a lot of friends, or are people who are like, I just don't know, but I'm really concerned about what I'm seeing out there. And so what we've spent a lot of time doing is how do we take great research, like the numbers that you were able to put together, and then translate that into guides, into guidance, into suggestions, into ways that are responsive to real everyday parents that are not too over the top, but that really do have a significant impact, because we know that what is happening out there is really serious, and it's probably going to get tougher. So I think that's why we can't talk about these things enough.
Your work at PFLAG, you and your colleagues have done an excellent job documenting what is the support needed for young people to thrive. And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that you've really seen work?
Yeah.
For trans, non-binary youth, LGBTQ, across the board?
Yeah, I think across the board, when we're looking sort of we can just say queer spaces put together, one of the biggest things is family support. There's been a lot of research done on this. You have seen some of it. We saw Caitlin Ryan's work really sort of establish the groundwork for a lot of what came after. And what we see is that having a supportive family, but not just a supportive family, but an educated and supportive family. So it goes beyond just saying, I love you, I value you, but it is parents who are engaged at a slightly higher level, because what young people are facing today is complicated and it's serious. And we already have seen the numbers. It literally is having an impact on their lives. But there are other pieces beyond that. So, I would say that educated and supportive parents are the most important thing, but also access to peers and access to resources that are appropriate for young people, so they don't feel isolated, so they know that they're connected, so they have a space to talk about it with people who are having similar experiences. Of course, with those guardrails, you want to make sure that those conversations are productive. We also know that culturally competent care is critical. So if young people do need support, they're going to practitioners who understand their needs, who are affirming of their identities, and who are taking them in the right direction. And I think the last thing, it's a little bit less tangible, but I think it's important, but to have spaces for young people to be who they are. And, for some young people, it may be things through their schools. So, sexuality alliances, we used to call them GSAs, things like that, but also spaces where they also might be creating their own networks. And it doesn't necessarily have to be queer specific, but it builds a sense of community. And that is so important in a time where I think our opposition is creating a tremendous sense of isolation.
Absolutely. We know from our own research and just research in the social sciences how crucial peer support is for these age groups, and perhaps even more so for those who are from minoritized groups or groups that are experiencing levels of oppression for whatever reason or another. So making those spaces available, that's part of Springtide's work, is how do we help adults create those sorts of spaces. You mentioned family support. Part of the data that we shared with you months back was that there's so many, unfortunately, trans and non-binary youth in particular, that don't necessarily think of home as a safe haven. They don't necessarily feel like they belong in their family unit. What do you think that parents, what's the number one thing that if a parent could do anything, it's like, okay, even if you can't do all those other things, please do this one thing. What would that be?
I think take what's going on seriously.
Okay.
I think so many adults, and all of us do this from time to time, have that reflexive moment of, you just need to tough this out because it's going to get better. Because in many cases, that in fact is true. We see this around growing up, around adolescence.
Absolutely.
However, we are looking at situations where, very bluntly and unfortunately, it may not get better. Yeah. And we have seen the really extreme examples about that, of kids who aren't even surviving some of these experiences. But we have also seen young people who are existing in a state of crisis for too long. It is a sustained crisis. So it's not a momentary, it happens and it's resolved. They are existing in a very long-term state of crisis. And that is what is happening because the environment around us. So I think taking this seriously and not doing that, you just need to be tough. It's going to get better. We're going to get through this. And really listening. And sometimes saying, you know what, sometimes it feels like we're not going to get through this. And sometimes it feels really dark. But let's figure out what can we control in this situation. But I think taking it seriously, if there's one thing I can say, it is that. And don't ever minimize what's happening.
Yeah. That makes complete sense, because part of the work, in our work, what we find is that many times young people do feel minimized by adults when it comes to their mental health, dismissed. Oh, it's not that bad, you're being dramatic, that sort of thing. And I think it might be even easier, correct me if I'm wrong, to dismiss or try to downplay a young person's reaction to this, because it is so big. Yeah. And it's like, how else can I shield my young person?
Yes.
Because it's all around us.
Yes.
It's on social media, it's on the news. There's people spewing a rhetoric that is harmful in many ways. And so what do we do about that? Seeing these bills, let's just talk about the legislation for a minute, because we unfortunately have all seen these things unfolding in our country. How do you think that a parent of a trans or non-binary young person, or if you have a young person who might have many friends
Yeah.
that are part of the queer community, how might they offer support at this time when there's so much impact coming from the outside?
Yeah.
And parents can only mitigate so much of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think you made a lot of really good points. But one of the things that like right away you said something and my brain started to totally light up was the fact that unlike what maybe I would have experienced as a young queer person, unlike even, some younger generations who are parenting now, we are looking at young people who are living in a nonstop environment of this information coming at them.
Yep.
And that is a unique twist that I think we cannot forget. For as many ways as the internet can be an amazing source of networking and support and finding community, it also means that at every single turn you are hearing about something bad that is happening, because it is so often the bad things that are reported, and there are a lot of bad things to be reported. And so I think that is really important to understand. And I think that even among queer people, and I started to see this in some cases, and we know a lot of queer people are parenting too.
Yes,
and they have young people. I think there still is this kind of, it's a natural response to say, listen, I went through a lot of stuff too as a queer person growing up. Yeah. But what I went through in the 90s looks nothing like what a young person is going through today. And so we need to kind of create that platform where we really say this is not okay. And I think with all the things that you can't control, there are a handful of things that you can control. And I think that's where parents need to focus. And I think one of the biggest ones, and I've interestingly enough become much more sensitive to this, I would say, in the last 2 to 3 years than I think I've ever been in my entire life, which is parents need to recognize you can say all of the right things and you can do all of the right things. But every single time you make an excuse for someone else's behavior or permit someone else's negative behavior around your child, you are saying something too. And that silence can mitigate it. I've been saying for a few months now, grandma doesn't get to say whatever she wants because she's grandma. Yeah. Grandma has learned and evolved, and the parents need to have that conversation. So I think, that's one of those things that you can control. And I think so often we think, oh, we need to show respect to this one or understand this one. Yes, we do. We do. I'm not saying that. But in terms of what we can control, creating a fully wall-to-wall supportive home unit is so critical. And that is something that you can control. But it's not easy. We often in PFLAG talk about the difference between being kind and being nice. Being nice is giving someone the bye just to keep the peace. Being kind is actually wading into that potential conflict because you know that conflict has caused damage to a young person who you promised to protect. And there's a real sense of betrayal there. So I think control the things you can control. You can't control what's happening in school, but you certainly can control what's happening at home. And I think that's where people need to start.
Wow. So, in our parent handbook, this was one of the things that we went back and forth on because we realized that many times how we were parented shows up in how we parent. And so that handbook gives a space for you to actually name how you were parented and then perhaps take some time to reflect on how that might be showing up in your parenting. Part of that dynamic about grandma, especially our beloved elders, others who are that we're surrounded by, we know that young people are watching us all the time, that we are constant models, whether we want to be or not. And so it's important for a parent of, honestly, any young person, but especially one from a minoritized group, to step back and say, how might I be able to use myself and my activities and my being to create a safe space for my child at all times? And sometimes that might mean walking in to a bit of conflict because I already know that this family member might damage our bubble, so to speak, a little bit. And we need to do some regulation there. But a parent has to be self-aware and secure enough to do that. And that's hard. Parenting is really hard no matter what. Yeah. But it's especially important for them to be able to hold this space for young people, even if it does take some painful reflection on one's own upbringing.
I think it's so true. And I mean, I think, I think about how I was raised, and I was raised to be tough, to be tough,
Right.
that the world is not here to help you in many cases. You are going to have to show up and, don't cry, be 10 times tougher than anyone else, work 20 times harder than everyone else, always show up. And while in many ways that benefited me, it set me up for a world that did not accept people like me. It also, looking at it, that is not necessarily the way I would approach it with a young person today, because the rules have changed. And some of that might be appropriate, but also it takes tremendous humility to say, maybe I don't know it all, and maybe I do need to reflect on this, and maybe there is another way to do this, but that truly takes humility, and that's really hard to get to when you are trying to juggle all of the other things you are trying to do as you raise young people.
Right, absolutely. And I think you mentioned this in your reflection. Parenting is not easy, no matter how you slice it. And I want to make very clear here as we have this conversation, we are not out to shame parents in any form or fashion, because we know first and foremost what a challenge it is. Our intent here is simply to give a forum to discuss these things, and then to give tools to help parents with some of these challenges. For those parents who perhaps do not have a queer child in the household, trans, non-binary, but they have a lot of friends, they might be walking alongside their child as their child witnesses how their friends are being treated, how some of the things they might be going through at home. How can a parent support not only the child, but then what's happening with the child and the child's friends? So it's one step removed.
And we see so many parents who are like that. I mean, almost every queer person can mention the friend who they had whose parents were super cool with the whole thing, and they spent a lot of time at their almost everyone has got one of those. And so I think there are two things that need to happen, and you're totally right to point this out. I think the first thing is if your child is being the ally to someone else, making sure that you're having conversations with them about how they're feeling about this, because there is often, for many allies, especially young people who don't have access to systems of power, a sense of powerlessness, of I have to watch my friend go through this, and it's disempowering. And I think talking about how they feel, how they might better navigate that is really, really critical stuff. And checking in with them, because this can take a huge toll on them too. Also, there is that guilt by association for many young people who often get, victimized as part of the group that's being victimized because they supported them. I think on the other side about it, sort of being that parent who might be the resource, again, making sure that you're educated and you understand fully what is going on, making sure you also understand that young person's situation, what information can and should not be shared, and also knowing what your limits are. I have seen this so many times in all these years at PFLAG. Everybody wants to be the helper. Everyone wants to do the right thing. Everyone immediately, the first reaction is, oh, you can come stay here. And I mean that literally and metaphorically. You can't always be that person. And so understanding, first of all, what your limitations are in terms of what you can handle, what you should versus maybe shouldn't be doing, and understand where it might be about connecting that young person with the inclusive provider, with the youth support group through the community center, with the online resources that they may need, is really important in checking in with them. But also understanding that this could pull your own child into a very difficult situation. I've actually helped a few friends with their children sort of navigate these situations, and it becomes their child's issue too.
Right.
And on the one hand, you just have this moment of people are so good, I can't even stand it. But on the other hand, you see it can become all consuming. And so you have to have some help in navigating that. And that's why I think handbooks like the one that you did are so good, because just because you're a parent doesn't mean you come into the situation knowing how to do things.
Absolutely.
Parents are figuring it out in many cases as they go along, which is why I'm in awe of what they're capable of. That's a lot of pressure. So I think understanding how you can both be supportive, but also when you are in over your head. and when it's time to get help.
Wow. Okay. Those are great thoughts, because it is important to know when to fold them, so to speak. That's part of the journey too.
It is.
I do want to, before we wrap up, because we have about 10 minutes left, I want to zoom out even further, circle back to the legislation part, because are there ways that parents, teachers, any counselors, any adult that's working with young people, how might they be able to start to make an impact at that national or state level, especially in states where we are seeing a lot of legislation aimed at these specific demographics?
Yeah. I think youth advocacy is tremendous. I was one of those young people who was encouraged from a very, very young age to get involved in the political process, to know who your legislators are, to interact with them. There's a lot that can be really empowering there. But before I say anything else, I also think it's really important for parents and caregivers to make sure that the young person fully understands what that kind of advocacy work might mean for them.
Right.
It can mean a loss of privacy. Often young people feel a little bit like, maybe I have to do this, and they're not quite understanding what that means. So I think having a really serious conversation about, if you do this, it might mean more people are going to see you. Mm-hmm. And that could lead to, and have that honest conversation. Having said that, I think there is so much power in youth advocacy. How many times have we seen young people testifying about the impact of this legislation? Whether we're talking about at a congressional level, at a state level, or even at a school board level. Sometimes those stories are really powerful. And I think one of the best things that parents and caregivers can do is helping children understand what that looks like, helping their young people understand what that looks like. And there are certainly groups that will help you do that. Often PFLAG chapters are doing advocacy work, but state equality organizations through the Equality Federation do a lot of lobbying. There's a lot of ways to learn how to do that. And I think in some cases, it is both a healthy reality check for young people to understand how a process works, that it isn't as fast as we often think it is, but also to be able to see where they fit into that system. Because some of this will be fought through, out and out activism. Some of it needs to be fought inside of systems. And I think that can be really exciting and empowering. And also, again, to the point that I made earlier, it builds that community. Chances are they're going to meet other young people who are doing this. And you're going to meet other parents who are going through this too. And that is such critical stuff. And it builds that community and that lack of isolation and that sense that you're not in it alone. Because what's happening, it's going to keep happening, and it's going to happen for a lot longer. We're not going to be out of this anytime soon, and I don't think we should lie about that. I think we need to be very honest. So how do we turn this into something we can work with? And I keep going back to all of the stuff that happened during the 90s with HIV and AIDS. Yeah. People who never saw themselves as activists found themselves as activists, and look at what they accomplished.
Yeah. And unfortunately, yes, we've come a long way. I grew up in the 90s too, come a long way in the HIV/AIDS crisis epidemic. And there's still a lot of stigma. There's still a lot around that community. Yeah. And so I can see why you would say, this ain't going away anytime soon. These are things that we're going to continue to fight, because a lot of these, yes, we're seeing it manifest in legislation, but there's also hearts and minds involved. And so that takes a long time to shift.
Changing the law is just the beginning of the conversation. That is literally just step one. It's actually after you can change a law, that's when the really hard work starts. That's the culture change, the hearts and minds. And that takes a very long time.
Yes. Absolutely. As we wrap up, is there anything that you think our audience should know that would be of help to parents who are supporting young people in any way, whether they birthed them, adopted them, are teaching them, whatever the case may be? What would you want them to know about how they could make an impact, perhaps immediately or for the long term?
I think that act of active support, of not waiting for someone to come to you, but, you know, making sure that you are talking about these things, you are having these conversations, that it is not silence that needs to be broken, that you are breaking the silence and starting that conversation is tremendous. Because the fear among young people, for as much progress as we've made, of will I be accepted here? Will I be supported? And even beyond that, when things get tough, who will have me? That's where it starts. And just not waiting for the young person to break the silence, but you break the silence. And that happens both through the proactive conversation, but it also is about all that stuff you do along the way. When you put that joke in check, when you put that remark in check, when you hold someone accountable for something that they've said or done, that is observed too. So remember, whether you're saying something or not, you're always saying something. And I think that's the place to start.
Absolutely. This is excellent, and I'm so glad that we had this time to reflect and talk about this very important topic. I want everyone here to go to springtideresearch.org. On our shop page, we absolutely have all of our products, but especially this mental health guide for parents that Jean Marie so wonderfully contributed to. Please check it out. It's free. Just download it. It's excellent. And please tell a friend. We're always glad to see new faces over at springtideresearch.org. Jean Marie, thank you. We're so glad to talk to you and to be in partnership with you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I can't emphasize it enough to people. Please download that handbook. It is really, really amazing. I learned a lot just reading it, never mind contributing. So please do that. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks to all who joined.
Bye.
Bye.